The crowd burst into laughter when a weary biker couple offered $1,200 for an old, rusted garage. But Jack Grayson just turned to his wife, smiled faintly, and said, "I'm not buying scrap metal, Em. I'm buying a chance to live again." That night, when they stepped into the decaying garage, the roof groaned, and the air smelled of rust and time. Emily wanted to give up. Then their dog, Diesel, began digging, until his paws hit something hard, a medal marked S. Weller, 1963. Since that night, Diesel hasn't stopped. What secret did the legendary mechanic leave buried beneath the earth? And why does it feel like this place has been waiting just for them? Subscribe now to hear more stories of veterans who ride across America, chasing freedom, faith, and redemption. The wind swept through Iron Creek, carrying the smell of dust and old iron, brushing against the faded signs and cracked windows of a town that had long forgotten what it was built for. The sky was a pale silver, the kind that promised heat without mercy, and somewhere in the distance, a train moaned like a tired ghost. Jack Grayson tightened his grip on the handlebar of his old Harley, its chrome dulled by years of travel and desert grit. The bike rumbled like a restless animal beneath him, vibrating through his scarred hands. His knuckles were thick, the skin rough, as though life had sanded him down to bone and callus. Jack was 42, tall and solid, with the posture of a man who had once carried too much weight on his shoulders, and maybe still did. His hair, streaked with gray, curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and his beard was trimmed short but uneven. There was a calmness in his gray eyes, the kind that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. Afghanistan had carved silence into him, and silence had stayed. Behind him rode Emily Grayson, his wife, or rather, the only person who had refused to stop believing he was still in there somewhere, beneath the wreckage of war and smoke. She was 37, tall and slender but strong in the way of women who have carried too many miles inside them. Her skin was a soft amber tone, her arms and shoulders adorned with tattoos, wings, wildflowers, and fragments of poems she never finished. Her auburn hair was tied up in a messy braid, a few strands catching sunlight as they rode. Emily's eyes were blue-green, but dimmed now, faded like paint left out in the sun. She used to laugh often. These days, her smiles came small and cautious, like someone testing a wound. Beside them, in a sidecar patched with metal and stickers from half the states in the country, sat Diesel, their German shepherd. He was 9 years old, large and muscular with a sable coat streaked by gray. His right ear bent slightly from an old injury. Once, he had been a military working dog, sharp, fearless, disciplined. But now he was just a soldier's best friend, a creature who still scanned every horizon, who still slept with his head toward the door. They had been on the road for months, drifting from state to state, never staying long enough to be known. Jack fixed bikes for cash. Emily tattooed in bars, or sometimes at biker rallies, drawing roses, skulls, and angels on people who wanted to feel something permanent. They had no house, only miles, the road their church, the Harley their altar. That morning, the fuel gauge was low, and their stomachs were empty when they reached Iron Creek, a small, wind-blown town that didn't appear on most maps anymore. Emily spotted a coffee shop beside the post office. Jack parked the Harley, and as she went inside, he noticed a piece of paper pinned to the bulletin board near the entrance. Yellowed, torn at the corners, printed with black letters. Public auction, Saturday, 11 a.m., Millbrook Town Hall. Item, Route 47, property of Silas Weller, garage and adjacent lot. Jack's heart stilled for a beat. The name hit him like a bell struck in the dark. Silas Weller. He hadn't heard it in years, not since Kandahar, not since the explosion that tore through the convoy and left Jack half buried under metal and fire. It was Silas, an older mechanic contracted with the army who had pulled him out, hands bleeding, face blackened with soot. Jack remembered the man's calm voice saying, "You're fine, soldier. You're still breathing." And then the chopper came, and Silas was gone. He stood there staring at the flyer, the edges fluttering in the breeze, until Emily returned with 2 coffees and that wary expression she always had when his eyes went distant. "What is it?" she asked. "Name I know," he said. "Silas Weller. He used to fix engines for the unit." Emily sipped her coffee. "So?" "So he's dead now," Jack replied quietly, eyes still on the flyer. "They're selling his garage." Her brow furrowed. "Jack, we can't even afford a decent motel room tonight. Don't tell me you're thinking about—" He didn't answer. He just folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. 2 hours later, they were sitting in the back row of Millbrook Town Hall. The wooden floorboards creaked under every shift of weight, and the air smelled faintly of old varnish and tobacco. The hall was half full. Local farmers, a few real estate men, and townsfolk looking for entertainment more than investment. Diesel lay quietly at Jack's feet, alert but calm, his tail flicking once every so often when someone coughed. At the front stood the auctioneer, a short, wiry man with slicked back hair and a bow tie that seemed to choke him. He held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Lot 47, he announced. "One garage property formerly owned by Mr. Silas Weller, located on Route 6, just past the ridge. Starting bid, $1,000. Jack leaned forward, elbows on knees. The number echoed in his head. 1,000. It wasn't much, but it was most of what they had left. Emily glanced sideways at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't even think about it." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I already am." The first bid came from a man in the front row, a contractor, judging by his boots and measuring tape on his belt. 1,000, he said. The auctioneer nodded, eyes scanning. "Do I hear 1,100? Silence, then a chuckle from somewhere behind Jack. "That old dump? You'd have to pay me to take it?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Jack raised his hand. 1,100. The laughter died. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. 1,100 from Mr. Grayson, Jack said simply. Emily pressed her palm to her forehead. "Jack, please. We don't even know if it's still standing." He ignored her. 1,200, he said. The auctioneer grinned. "Going once." Emily's hand found his arm, trembling slightly. "Jack, this is insane." "Going twice?" Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. He could almost hear Silas's voice, calm, steady, from years ago. "You're still breathing, soldier." "Sold!" The gavel hit the block with a sharp crack. "Sold to Mr. Grayson for $1,200. A low murmur spread through the hall, some laughing, some pitying. Diesel raised his head, ears twitching at the sound, as if understanding that something irreversible had just happened. Outside, the sunlight was blinding after the dimness of the hall. Emily walked ahead, her boots crunching on gravel. Jack followed, folding the receipt carefully into his pocket. For a moment they stood by the Harley in silence. The wind smelled of oil and sagebrush. She turned to him, eyes hard with frustration but soft with fear. "What were you thinking?" He took a slow breath. "I wasn't. Maybe that's the point. We're broke, Jack. We can't keep pretending life's a movie where something saves us in the last act." He looked at her then. Really looked. At the lines worry had drawn around her mouth, the tattoos that hid scars she never spoke about. "Do you remember what you told me after I came home?" he asked. She frowned. "Which part?" "You said," he murmured. The war ended, but you didn't. Her eyes softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. And you think this garage is going to end it? He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth tugging upward beneath the beard. I think maybe it's a start. She exhaled, shaking her head. You bought a pile of rust and bad memories. He swung a leg over the Harley, Diesel already hopping into the sidecar, waiting patiently. Jack looked at the road stretching out ahead, the sunlight glinting on the horizon like a blade. Then he looked back at her and said quietly, I didn't buy scrap metal, Em. I bought a chance to live again. The road that led to the old Weller garage was narrow and cracked, the asphalt blistered by years of sun and neglect. Dust followed the Harley like a brown ghost, curling around its tires, and the sidecar where Diesel sat proudly, tongue lolling, eyes bright despite his age. The land stretched out in every direction, dry grass, a few skeletal trees, and the occasional hawk circling lazily in the heat. When Jack turned the final corner, the building appeared like a shipwreck, stranded in the middle of a desert sea. The corrugated metal walls were blistered with rust, the paint stripped bare. Half the roof sagged inward, and the sign that once read, Weller Mechanical Repair, hung crooked, clinging to a single chain, as though it, too, was tired of holding on. Emily removed her helmet, the wind unraveling her braid. Sweat glistened on her neck, and she stared at the garage with an expression halfway between disbelief and despair. You have got to be kidding me, she muttered. Her voice, once melodic, carried a gravelly edge now, worn from too many cigarettes and too many disappointments. Jack killed the engine. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the distant buzz of cicadas. He studied the structure with the steady eyes of a soldier surveying a battlefield. It's still standing, he said quietly. Barely, Emily replied. She dismounted and kicked a rock toward the rusted door, which groaned in protest. There's probably more termites than bolts holding it up. Diesel leapt from the sidecar, his paws landing softly in the tall grass. He began to sniff the perimeter, tail flicking, ears twitching. Dust swirled around him, and his dark fur shimmered like old bronze in the sunlight. Jack walked closer to the garage, his boots crunching over shattered glass and old bolts. He ran a hand across the cold metal, feeling the texture of time, rough, pitted, unyielding. Beneath his fingertips he could almost feel Silas Weller's ghost, the steady rhythm of hammer on steel, the smell of oil and sweat, the sound of jazz playing faintly from a tin radio in the corner. Emily stayed near the bike, arms crossed, tattoos shifting with the flex of her muscles. Jack, she said after a moment, I know you think this means something, but maybe it's just an old ruin. Maybe that's all it ever was. He turned to her, the sunlight outlining the hard planes of his face. When I was trapped under that truck in Kandahar, Silas told me something before the chopper came. What? He said, you fix what you can and you leave the rest to time? Jack looked back at the rusted door. I think maybe time's waited long enough. Emily sighed, shaking her head, but her gaze softened. She knew that tone, low, steady, the voice he used when he wasn't asking for understanding but quietly pleading for belief. Then Diesel barked once, sharply, from the tall grass near the front door. He was digging, paws flinging dirt behind him. Jack and Emily exchanged a glance before walking over. The dog's tail wagged furiously as he unearthed something metallic. Jack knelt beside him and brushed the soil away. It was a small brass medallion, round, tarnished, its edges dulled by time. The inscription was faint but visible under the dust. S. Weller, 1963. Jack turned it over in his palm, the metal warm from the sun. Emily crouched next to him, her shadow crossing his shoulder. "What is it?" she asked. "An ID tag, maybe," Jack murmured. "Silas used to stamp his initials on his work, but this looks older. Maybe personal." Emily studied it for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe he wants you to finish what he started." Jack looked up at her, brow furrowed. "You don't believe in that kind of thing?" "Normally, no," she said, rising to her feet, "but Diesel seems to." The dog sat back, tail brushing the dirt, eyes fixed on the garage as if waiting for something else to happen. The afternoon stretched long and slow. Jack pried open the garage door with a crowbar he found lying nearby. The hinges screamed, dust exploding into the air like a sigh. Inside, the space was vast but empty, save for a few rusted engine blocks, a fallen workbench, and the carcass of an old pickup truck whose hood gaped like an open mouth. Sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, cutting through the darkness in sharp, golden beams. Dust motes drifted like tiny ghosts. Emily stepped inside cautiously, the floor creaking beneath her boots. "You weren't kidding," she said. "This place is a death trap." Jack ignored her tone. He walked to the back wall where a faded calendar still hung, pages curled and yellowed. The year read 1989. The last month marked was July. He touched the corner of it gently, as though it might crumble under his fingers. Outside, Diesel barked again. Emily went to check, but this time he wasn't digging. He was lying down in the grass near the entrance, watching them, head tilted slightly as if he understood something they didn't. By sundown, they had made camp just outside the garage. Jack gathered scraps of old timber from behind the building, and Emily lit a small fire. The flames flickered against the metal walls, casting long shadows that moved like memories. Diesel settled beside Jack, head resting on his boot. Emily pulled out her sketchbook from her backpack, its leather cover worn soft from use, and began to draw by firelight. Her pencil scratched quietly over the paper. She was sketching the garage, but not as it was, as it could be. A cafe and repair shop in one, neon signs, rows of bikes parked out front, and a wooden porch with old record music floating through the air. "A biker cafe," she said softly, not looking up. "A place where people stop to rest. Coffee, stories, a little warmth." Jack leaned back against the Harley, arms folded, watching her. "You still dream big," he said. "It's cheaper than therapy." He chuckled, and for a moment it sounded like the man she'd known before the war, low, steady, full of quiet humor. The sound surprised them both. They ate canned beans and bread by the fire, and when darkness settled fully, the desert came alive with the hum of crickets and the sigh of wind through rusted tin. Emily closed her sketchbook, and Diesel shifted closer, curling up beside her knees. His fur gleamed in the orange glow, his ears flicking toward every noise beyond the circle of light. Jack stared at the garage door, its metal reflecting the fire's shimmer like dull gold. "Maybe he left more behind than we think," he said quietly. Emily followed his gaze. "You mean Silas?" "Yeah. You think he's buried treasure in there or something?" Jack shook his head slowly. "Not gold. Something else. A reason." Emily looked at him for a long moment, then reached over to squeeze his hand. "Then I guess we'll find it." The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks into the night. Diesel's breathing slowed, his body pressed close to the ground, guarding the silence like a sentinel. Above them, stars began to emerge, sharp and cold against the black sky. Jack looked up at them, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to stillness. Not peace, not yet, but the faint memory of it. The garage stood behind them, its rusted skin catching the firelight, glowing like an ember refusing to die. And Diesel, ever watchful, kept his eyes on that old door as though he could see the secret sleeping behind it. The third week in Iron Creek arrived wrapped in heat and silence. The sun scorched the corrugated roof of the garage until it shimmered like molten copper. The smell of oil and dry dust had already soaked into their skin. For days, Jack and Emily had worked side by side, cleaning debris, patching holes, replacing old bolts. But something about the place still felt alive, as though the walls themselves were listening. Jack had started sleeping lighter. The nights were long and restless. The whir of crickets outside blended with the metallic creaks of the garage settling. Sometimes he caught Diesel awake too, the dog's ears pricked, nose twitching towards the corner near the old workbench. Diesel never barked at random, not since his service days. He was a disciplined soldier even in retirement, and that made Jack uneasy. One windless afternoon, Diesel began barking sharply again, hackles raised, his body stiff as wire. The sound bounced around the metal walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emily came running from outside, wiping sweat from her forehead with a grease-stained rag. Her hair, once neatly braided, now hung loose, the ends curling from heat and work. "What's wrong with him this time?" she asked, voice edged with fatigue. Jack crouched beside Diesel, who stood planted near the corner of the floor. "Same spot as before," Jack muttered. He rapped his knuckles against the ground. The sound came back, hollow, a deep, metallic echo beneath the concrete. His brows furrowed. "There's something under here." Emily leaned against the workbench, her tattooed arms glinting with sweat. "Probably a rusted pipe or an old drain." "No," Jack said. He ran his hand across the surface, feeling the faint vibration. "Listen." Diesel scratched once at the ground, whining softly now instead of barking. His tail was stiff, his body alert but not afraid. It wasn't fear that moved the dog. It was recognition. Jack stood, grabbed a crowbar, and began prying up the cracked flooring. The noise of metal against cement filled the air, sharp and grating. Emily winced, but didn't stop him. Beneath the first layer of concrete lay a sheet of dark steel, its edges smooth, its center marked by faint engravings. When the light hit just right, the letters appeared. SW 1963. Emily knelt beside him, brushing dust away. "Silas Weller," she said softly. "The same as the medallion." Jack nodded, his pulse quickening. This must be part of his workshop. He felt the cool steel with his fingertips. Not corroded, not rusted. Someone had sealed it perfectly. It took nearly an hour to unbolt the plate. When he finally lifted it, a rush of stale air rose from beneath, thick with the scent of oil and age. Inside lay a small tin box, about the size of a toolbox, its lid secured with an old brass latch. Emily hesitated. "You sure we should open it?" Jack gave a half smile. "You want to call the historical society first?" She rolled her eyes. "I'm serious, Jack. What if this was meant to stay buried?" He paused, the line of his jaw tightening. Then he wouldn't have left his name on it. With a soft click, the latch gave way. Inside, carefully wrapped in faded cloth, were several sheets of yellowing blueprints, detailed sketches of an engine, handwritten notes in small, precise script, and at the bottom, a tarnished brass key tied with string. The smell of ink and iron rose from the papers, mingling with dust. Emily reached out to lift one of the drawings. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The engine design was intricate, something between a jet turbine and a motorcycle motor, drawn with the precision of an artist and the obsession of an engineer. "It looks like a hybrid," she murmured. "Some kind of prototype." Jack's eyes moved over the notes. Silas called it a micro-reactive propulsion core. He traced a line of handwriting that read, "Not for mass production, only for purpose." Emily tilted her head. Purpose? What kind of man writes that? Jack looked up, his gaze distant. The kind who builds something and regrets it. Diesel sniffed the air, pawing gently at the edge of the pit. He gave a low whine, turning his head toward the rear of the garage, toward the overgrown field behind it. Emily noticed and frowned. "He keeps doing that," she said. "Always staring back there." Jack stood, wiping sweat from his forehead. The heat inside the garage was oppressive now. "There's nothing out there but weeds." "Then why does he act like there's something waiting?" Jack didn't answer. He looked again at the box, the key glinting faintly under the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was something deliberate about the way it had been hidden. Not panic, planning. Silas had meant for someone to find it, but only when the time was right. That evening, as the desert cooled, Jack sat outside sharpening a chisel under the dim light of the fire pit. Diesel lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes fixed on the horizon. Emily was inside, spreading the blueprints across the workbench, her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined the drawings. She wasn't an engineer, but she was an artist, and she could feel the rhythm behind Silas's lines. They were drawn like music, every curve with intention. When Jack entered, she didn't look up. "You know," she said softly, "people don't make things like this unless they're trying to say something." Jack leaned over her shoulder, the scent of oil and metal clinging to him. "What do you think he was trying to say?" Emily touched the corner of the paper, tracing the initials again. Maybe that he wasn't done. Diesel barked once, low and short, from the doorway. Jack turned. The dog was staring again toward the field, where the moonlight pooled silver over the grass. There was a perfect circle. There, a patch where nothing grew, the soil dark and bare. Emily noticed it too and whispered, "That's strange." Jack's voice dropped lower. "Maybe that's where he meant to finish." They stood together in silence, the desert wind sweeping through the open door, carrying with it the faint sound of rattling tin and a feeling that something, or someone, was still waiting to be found. Diesel lay down near the threshold, eyes fixed on the field, ears twitching at every stir of the night air. And inside, the steel plate on the floor gleamed faintly in the firelight, like a sealed promise finally beginning to speak. The storm arrived without warning, rolling across the desert like an army of thunder. By nightfall, the wind howled through the valleys around Iron Creek, bending the trees and rattling the rusted roof of the Weller garage. Rain came in heavy sheets, striking the tin walls so hard that every drop sounded like the tapping of impatient fingers. Lightning flashed, bleaching the world white for seconds at a time, then plunging it back into shadow. Inside, Jack Grayson sat by the small fire they had built near the entrance, his eyes following every flicker of light. Diesel lay at his feet, tense, ears twitching at each thunderclap. The dog hated storms, though he never whimpered. He just watched the door as if guarding them from something unseen. Emily was pacing near the workbench, arms folded, the glow from the lantern painting shifting patterns across her tattoos. Her damp hair clung to her neck, and frustration shadowed her face. "The roof's leaking again," she said, voice sharp with fatigue. Jack didn't look up. "We'll fix it tomorrow. You said that last week. And I'll mean it this time." Her sigh was loud enough to drown out the thunder for a moment. She stopped beside him, staring into the fire. "You've been reading those blueprints every night like they're scripture. Silas Weller's gone, Jack. Whatever he built, it's dead with him." Jack met her gaze. The firelight reflected in his gray eyes like steel-catching flame. Men like Silas don't bury their work. They hide it for someone to find. Another lightning flash illuminated the far end of the room, and for a split second, Emily thought she saw Diesel move toward the back door. Then came the sound. A deep, shuddering crack, like the earth itself exhaling. Diesel barked once, sharply. The floor trembled beneath their feet. Emily stumbled, clutching the doorframe. Jack grabbed the lantern and ran outside into the storm. The rain hit his face like nails, and the air smelled of wet iron and dust. Diesel was already there, barking near the back field, where the tall grass sloped toward the garage's rear wall. Jack's boots sank into the mud as he reached him. "What is it, boy?" The answer came from the ground itself. A section of earth had caved in, forming a shallow pit where water pooled and hissed with steam from the heat of the storm. In its center, half buried beneath the mud, was a square outline of metal, the edge of a heavy iron hatch. Lightning split the sky again, and for an instant the whole thing gleamed silver. Emily arrived moments later, soaked, her eyes wide. "Jack, what is that?" "What we were meant to find." He knelt, brushing away mud until his fingers found the keyhole. From his pocket, he pulled the small brass key they'd discovered in Silas's tin box. Emily's breath caught. "You don't think only one way to know?" The key slid in with surprising ease. It turned once, twice, and the mechanism gave a low metallic sigh before unlocking. Jack gripped the handle and heaved. The hatch groaned, but finally gave way, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. A stale gust of air escaped, thick with the scent of oil, rust, and something older, like the breath of time itself. Diesel growled softly, tail low, but didn't back away. Jack took the lantern from Emily and stepped down, each creaking stair echoing in the confined space. Emily hesitated at the top, then followed, her hand on the wall to steady herself. The light revealed a small underground room, its walls lined with metal shelves, its floor covered in a thin film of dust. In the far corner stood several sealed metal crates, untouched for decades. The ceiling dripped faintly from the rain above, but everything else was intact. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "It's like a tomb." Jack set the lantern on the nearest crate and pried it open. Inside were blueprints, carefully rolled and bound with red string. Beneath them lay thick ledgers, a leather-bound notebook, and several yellowed envelopes stamped with government seals. "He kept everything," Jack said quietly, awe mingling with disbelief. "Designs, correspondence, contracts, it's all here." He opened the notebook. The first page was written in neat cursive. Silas Weller, 1964. Personal log. He began to read aloud, the words catching in his throat as he went. "They took everything. My brother signed the patent under his own name, the military took the credit, and now the world believes I am mad. But I will not let them erase me. The truth will sleep here, under the ground, until a man of honor finds it." Emily stood beside him, silent. The rain above softened into a steady rhythm, like distant applause. "He was betrayed," she murmured, "by his own brother." Jack nodded slowly. "He built engines for the army, experimental propulsion systems. His brother sold them off, claimed the designs were his. Silas must have lost everything." He turned another page. The writing grew shakier, the lines darker. "They call me paranoid. Let them. A man who keeps his truth hidden keeps his dignity intact." Jack lowered the notebook. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He reminds me of someone." Emily looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You," she said. He didn't deny it. The army took years from me, he said quietly. Promised purpose, gave me ghosts. Men like Silas. They build, they serve, they believe, and when it's over, they're discarded. Diesel nudged his hand softly, breaking the silence. The dog's amber eyes reflected the lantern light, calm, but unblinking. Jack knelt and scratched his head. He hid all this to protect his name, Jack murmured. Maybe that's all a man like him ever gets, the chance to tell the world he wasn't a fool. Emily's hand brushed his shoulder. Or the chance to be remembered. He looked up at her, his expression softer now. Maybe both. They packed the documents carefully, wrapping the notebook and blueprints in dry cloth. When they climbed back up, the storm had passed. The sky was clearing, streaked with moonlight, the air cool and heavy with petrichor. Jack turned once to look back at the open hatch, now half covered in mist. For a moment he imagined Silas standing there, a man of grease and iron, gray hair slicked back, eyes bright with stubborn pride, watching them with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose secret had finally been found. Diesel barked once into the darkness, as if in salute. Then Jack pulled the hatch closed and locked it again, sealing the chamber beneath them. He slipped the brass key into his pocket, the metal still warm from his hand. Emily leaned against him, her head resting briefly on his shoulder. "What now?" she asked. Jack looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to rise. "Now," he said softly, "we make sure the world remembers his name." Morning came with the hum of engines and the smell of trouble. The road into Iron Creek, usually empty except for the occasional truck, now carried a line of black SUVs that glinted under the desert sun like a column of beetles. From the window of the Weller garage, Jack Grayson watched the convoy approach, jaw clenched, cigarette burning between his fingers. Emily stood beside him, arms folded, wearing one of his old denim shirts, sleeves rolled high, her forearms tattooed with roses and flames. Her expression was hard, but there was a flicker of unease behind her eyes. Diesel lay by the door, alert, tail still, watching as if he too knew the sound of an advancing army. The SUVs stopped in front of the property. The first door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He was in his early 50s, with silver hair combed back like polished steel, and the kind of tailored suit that never seemed to crease. His face was square, tanned from golf courses and boardrooms, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When he removed his sunglasses, his gaze was sharp and calculating. "Mr. Grayson?" he called out, voice smooth but cold. Jack didn't move. "Who's asking?" The man approached, hand outstretched in mock civility. "Leonard H. Weller," he said. "President of Weller Automotive Group. You've got something that belongs to my family?" Emily stepped forward before Jack could answer. "The only thing your family left here was rust and broken promises." Leonard's smile tightened. "Charming." He looked around, taking in the half-repaired garage, the patched roof, the fire pit still black from last night's embers. "You must be the wife. Emily, isn't it? The artist." Jack ground out the cigarette under his boot. "State your business." Leonard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather folder. Inside was a printed notice stamped with the seal of the county courthouse. "We're filing a claim for the property and its contents, the garage, any intellectual materials found within, and all derivative discoveries fall under Weller family ownership. That includes anything you've unearthed recently." Jack didn't take the paper. "Silas Weller was the one who built this place, not your company. He was cheated by his own brother. You're his blood, right? You should know that." Leonard's eyes flickered just slightly. "My grandfather made mistakes, sure, but we're here to correct them. and to make sure his legacy is handled properly. Emily scoffed. By handled, you mean stolen again. Leonard's smile vanished. You can fight this in court if you wish, but I assure you, our lawyers are very good. You won't stand a chance. Diesel growled low, stepping between Jack and Leonard. The man froze for an instant, then took a cautious step back. Nice dog, he muttered, voice clipped. You should keep him away from strangers. Wouldn't want him to get hurt. Jack's tone turned icy. That sound like a threat? Leonard slipped his sunglasses back on, his reflection catching the sun. Just friendly advice. He turned, gestured to one of his assistants, a young man in a black suit, thin, nervous, eyes darting behind rectangular glasses. The assistant handed Leonard a pen to sign something, but his hands trembled slightly. His name tag read, Richard Crane. He avoided eye contact with Jack and Emily, mumbling to Leonard about meeting times and court filings. See you in court, Mr. Grayson, Leonard said finally. Don't get too comfortable. The convoy of SUVs kicked up dust as they left, their engines fading into the hills. For a long time, silence hung in their wake. Emily finally exhaled, rubbing her temples. They're serious, Jack. They're not just going to walk away. Jack nodded slowly. Neither will I. 2 days later, the official papers arrived. The letterhead gleamed, Weller Automotive Group vs. Jack and Emily Grayson. It accused them of trespassing, theft of intellectual property, and possession of stolen materials. Jack read every line in silence, then folded it carefully and set it on the workbench. They think we'll run, he said quietly. Emily looked up from where she was scrubbing a grease stain off her arm. Maybe we should. We don't have money for lawyers. Jack turned toward her, his voice low. If we leave, Silas loses again. They buried his name once already. I won't help them do it twice. That night, Diesel didn't eat. He paced near the fence, restless, growling occasionally at shadows only he seemed to see. Around midnight, Emily went to fetch him a bowl of water and noticed something strange near the back gate, a small plastic vial lying half buried in the dirt. It was empty, but the cap was broken, and it smelled faintly of bitter almonds. Her stomach dropped. Jack! She shouted. By the time he came running, Diesel was lying on his side, breathing shallow, his body trembling. Emily knelt beside him, tears blurring her vision. He's been poisoned! Jack froze for half a heartbeat, then scooped Diesel into his arms. The dog was heavy, limp, but his eyes still followed Jack weakly. They tore down the dirt road in the truck, the tires skidding through gravel. Iron Creek had only one veterinarian, an old man named Dr. Harmon, who lived above his clinic near the edge of town. He was tall and thin, his hair white, his skin tanned and lined from years in the sun. He had the no-nonsense air of someone who had seen more death than sleep. When Jack banged on his door, Harmon appeared in a robe, rubbing his eyes. It's after midnight, Grayson. It's Diesel, Jack said, voice breaking. Poison. The doctor didn't hesitate. Bring him in. Hours passed in agonizing quiet as Harmon worked, his hands steady, his voice calm. Emily sat in the hallway, head in her hands, listening to the faint rhythm of Diesel's breathing from the next room. Jack stood at the window, fists clenched, staring out into the night. At dawn, Harmon emerged, wiping his hands. He's strong, he said simply. If you'd been an hour later, it'd be different. Emily threw her arms around the doctor. Thank you. Harmon nodded, tired eyes softening. Keep him close, and watch your back, son. Men who threaten a dog don't stop there. They brought Diesel home that morning. The dog was weak but alert, resting on an old blanket near the fire. Jack sat beside him for hours, silent, one hand resting on Diesel's flank, feeling each breath. When the sun set again, he finally spoke. "They tried to scare us," he said. His voice was low, calm, but in his eyes something cold had settled, something solid. "They think we'll fold, that I'll give up." Emily knelt beside him, her hand finding his. "And will you?" Jack shook his head slowly. "If I walk away now, Silas Weller becomes a footnote in someone else's story. I won't let them bury him again." Diesel lifted his head slightly, pressing his nose against Jack's arm. It was weak, but the gesture said enough. Jack smiled faintly. "We're in this together, buddy." Outside, the night was still. But deep inside Jack Grayson, something had shifted. The quiet despair that had haunted him for years had burned away, leaving only resolve. For the first time since the war, he knew what his fight was for. The courthouse in Redstone County stood like a relic of another age, its white columns streaked with rust from rain, its marble floors polished by a century of arguments and confessions. Jack Grayson stood outside those steps, the morning sun sharp on his face. He wore his only good jacket, a brown leather one scarred by time, the same one he'd worn through deserts half a world away. Beside him, Emily adjusted her black bandana, her expression steady but eyes clouded by nerves. Diesel sat at her feet, a picture of calm loyalty, his thick coat brushed to a soldier's shine. Jack took a slow breath. "You ready?" Emily smirked faintly. "I was ready the day they poisoned Diesel." Inside, the air buzzed with the low hum of conversation and the faint scent of coffee from paper cups. Reporters had gathered in the gallery. The story of the garage war between a small-town biker couple and a multinational automotive empire had become a local sensation. Flashbulbs flared when the Graysons entered. Sitting at their table was Alan Brewster, their attorney. A broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his close-cropped hair was more gray than black, and an old scar traced the line of his jaw. Alan had once been a Marine captain before turning to law, and it showed in his posture, rigid, no nonsense. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of someone who'd commanded men under fire. "They'll come at us hard," he said quietly, flipping open a binder thick with documents. "But they made a mistake underestimating us." Emily eyed him warily. "You really think one binder can beat an army of corporate lawyers?" Alan's mouth twitched into something almost like a grin. "This binder's got truth in it. That's worth more than their entire PR budget." Across the room, Leonard Weller sat surrounded by his legal team, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His attorney, Margaret Sloan, was a thin, hawk-eyed woman in her early 60s, her steel-gray hair pinned into a perfect twist. She had the look of someone who'd devour a witness for breakfast and ask for coffee afterward. When she caught Jack's eye, her lips curved into a polite but predatory smile. The judge entered, an elderly man with kind eyes, but a voice that could silence a riot. "Court is now in session." The case unfolded over 3 tense days. The corporation argued that all designs under the Weller name were family property, regardless of who had created them. Margaret's voice was sharp as glass when she cross-examined Jack, her questions laced with insinuations. "So, Mr. Grayson, you're claiming a decades-old design, found by chance, entitles you to override generations of documented ownership?" Jack met her gaze evenly. "I'm claiming that Silas Weller never sold what was his. He hid it because his own brother tried to steal it. He wasn't protecting gold. He was protecting his name." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Alan rose. "Your Honor," he said, his voice firm, "we have physical evidence, contracts, correspondence, patents, all signed by Silas Weller, none transferred, none sold. The company's entire claim rests on forged documents created by his brother after Silas disappeared. What Mr. Grayson found isn't just an invention. It's the truth this family buried. He placed the original notebook and blueprints on the evidence table. The judge leaned forward, flipping through the pages with care. Silas's handwriting danced across the paper in neat, deliberate strokes, ending on the line that had haunted Jack since the day he read it. A man's name is his last invention. By the end of the third day, the tide had turned. Margaret's objections grew sharper, more desperate, while Leonard sat stiff and silent, jaw tight, his earlier confidence gone. The verdict came on a warm Friday afternoon. "The court finds in favor of Jack and Emily Grayson," the judge declared. "The intellectual property of Silas Weller is recognized as his independent creation, never transferred or sold. The defendant's claim is invalid. Restitution for defamation and damages is to be paid in full by Weller Automotive Group." Emily gasped softly. Jack closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Alan clapped him once on the shoulder, a quiet gesture of victory. "You did good, son," he said. "You fought clean." Leonard rose without a word, his face pale beneath the courtroom lights. He started toward them, but Diesel stood, low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Leonard hesitated, then turned away. Margaret followed him, her expression unreadable. When they stepped outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, bright and clean. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing like bayonets. "Mr. Grayson, how does it feel to take down a corporation?" one shouted. Jack smiled faintly, slipping on his sunglasses. "It wasn't about taking anyone down," he said. "It was about lifting someone back up." Months later, Iron Creek looked different. The old garage had been transformed, its walls painted deep copper and black, the sign above the door shining with a new name, the Rusted Halo. Neon light glowed softly at dusk, welcoming travelers from the highway. The scent of coffee and engine grease mingled in the air, familiar and comforting. The cafe inside was alive with chatter, truckers swapping stories, veterans nursing mugs of coffee, bikers tuning their bikes outside. On one wall hung a framed photograph of Silas Weller, his eyes caught mid-laughter beside an engine block. Beneath it, Emily had arranged an exhibition space she called The Dream of Silas. Blueprints hung under glass, his notebook open to the page where he'd written his final entry. In the corner sat the prototype engine, gleaming after months of restoration, polished to a mirror shine. Emily stood beside it, explaining its design to a curious teenager in a grease-stained jacket. "It's not just a machine," she said. "It's a story about persistence, about building something that lasts longer than anger." Outside, Jack was helping a young veteran fix a carburetor under the warm light of the setting sun. The man's name was Ethan Cole, mid-30s, gaunt from hard times but with clear eyes that spoke of survival. He had lost a leg in Iraq and now rode a custom bike with a side brace. "I thought I was done," Ethan admitted quietly, watching Jack's hands work. "But this place, it feels like coming back." Jack smiled, handing him the wrench. "That's what it's for." Diesel trotted over, tail wagging, nosing at Ethan's prosthetic before settling beside him, head tilted. Ethan laughed for the first time in years. As the sky deepened into indigo, Emily joined Jack outside. They leaned against the railing, watching the lights flicker on across the highway. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked softly. Jack shook his head, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "We didn't find gold, Em." She looked up at him, smiling. "No," she said. "We found something better." Jack nodded. "We found faith again." Behind them, the sign of the Rusted Halo glowed brighter, casting a soft halo of light over the gravel lot. Diesel barked once, as if agreeing, then settled between them. The desert night stretched wide and silent, full of wind, dust, and the quiet hum of second chances. A full year had passed since the verdict, and Iron Creek no longer looked like the ghost town it once was. The highway that used to echo with nothing but the hum of wind now pulsed with life. Motorcycles roaring in and out, chrome glinting in the desert sun. Dust rose like smoke trails as travelers stopped by the Rusted Halo, the cafe and workshop that had become the heart of the town. Its neon sign burned softly even in daylight, a halo-shaped ring of amber light circling the name that shimmered in steel letters. The Rusted Halo, Est by Jack and Emily Grayson. Every morning began the same way. Olivia Hayes, the young woman who had once been their neighbor, unlocked the front door with a smile that never seemed to fade. At 26, she had the kind of presence that could calm a storm. Tall and lean, with sun-kissed skin, freckles like dusted copper, and light brown hair always tied in a loose ponytail. She wore worn denim and a black vest that read, Halo Crew, her movements brisk but graceful. Olivia had a soft spot for people who looked like they'd been through something. Bikers, veterans, or wanderers who carried too much silence in their eyes. She treated them all the same. Like family. Diesel trotted beside her every morning, his coat now flecked with gray around the muzzle, but his stride still proud and strong. He greeted each customer with a wag of the tail and a gentle nudge, then stationed himself near the counter as if he were part of the staff. Tourists called him the Guardian of the Halo. Locals just called him the Old Soldier. By mid-morning, the sound of guitars and laughter filled the air. Inside, Emily worked behind the bar, pouring coffee and teasing regulars. Her hair, streaked with a little more silver now, was tied up in a bandana. Tattoos ran down her arms like living vines, stories in ink that she'd collected across decades. On the far wall, the exhibit she'd built, The Dream of Silas, remained untouched except for a small addition. A framed photo of Jack and Emily on their Harley, Diesel between them, the desert stretching endless behind. Beneath it, she'd placed a small plaque that read, Built from the ashes, driven by faith. Jack sat most mornings on the porch, coffee in one hand, Diesel stretched out at his boots. The wind had carved deeper lines into his face, and his beard was flecked with gray, but his eyes still held the sharp light of someone who'd once seen chaos and chosen peace. From his chair, he could see the sign they'd hung above the garage entrance, an old steel plate they'd polished until the engraving shone clearly again. Silas Weller, Mechanic of Dreams. Sometimes visitors asked about the name. Jack always smiled. He built engines that could fly, he'd say. But more than that, he built hope. That afternoon, the town gathered for the anniversary of the Rusted Halo. Bikers lined their rides in a perfect row outside, engines cooling, chrome, gleaming under the amber sun. Inside, the air buzzed with warmth and the smell of oil, leather, and fresh bread. A small stage had been set up in the corner, where Ethan Cole, the veteran with one leg and a quiet heart, strummed his guitar. His prosthetic boot tapped the rhythm against the wooden floor as his voice filled the room, low, rough, and full of soul. Here's to the road behind us, he sang, and the one that's still waiting ahead. Emily leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on a rag, watching Jack talk to a group of young mechanics who had come to see the place. They looked at him the way recruits look at a captain, a mix of respect and awe. One of them, a freckled kid with bright eyes, asked, "Sir, did you ever think this garage would end up like this?" Jack smiled, slow and genuine. "No," he said. "I just thought I was buying a piece of rust." The kid laughed. "And you found gold instead?" Jack looked past him, out toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to sink. "Something better," he said. "You can spend gold once, But when you build something that helps people stand again, that lasts. Olivia approached from behind, carrying a tray of drinks. "You sound like one of those biker philosophers again," she teased. Jack chuckled. "Only on good days." The evening turned golden, the kind of light that made even the dust look holy. Emily joined Jack outside as the crowd thinned, the two of them watching Diesel greet a family pulling in on an old pickup. The child, barely 6, with a red cap too big for his head, ran to pet him, laughing as Diesel's tail thumped against the ground. Emily smiled softly. "You ever think Silas is watching all this?" Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes on the horizon. "I think he never left." He nodded toward the steel plate above the garage. "That name up there, it doesn't just belong to him anymore. It belongs to everyone who ever fixed what was broken." The light deepened to orange and red, the desert swallowing the sun whole. Diesel rose, stretched, and looked toward the sign, letting out a single bark that echoed softly through the cooling air. Jack laughed under his breath. "Guess he agrees." Emily's hand found his. They sat there in silence, the world humming gently around them, the murmur of bikes, the music drifting from inside, the rhythm of a place reborn. As the first stars appeared, a familiar song began to play inside, a slow rock country ballad about redemption and home. The camera of memory would have pulled back then, the way stories end when words no longer need to be spoken. From above, Iron Creek shimmered like a handful of lights in the dark. At its heart, the garage glowed with golden warmth. On the porch sat a man who'd found peace, a woman who'd found her voice, and a dog who'd found his rest. Jack looked at Emily and said quietly, "The real treasure isn't buried. Underground! It's here, in the hearts of people who refuse to give up." Emily smiled through the fading light. "Then we've already struck gold." Diesel barked once more, the sound carrying into the desert wind like a blessing from another time. The neon halo flickered softly above them, painting everything in amber. The couple, the dog, the garage that had once been nothing but rust. And as night settled over Iron Creek, the rusted halo kept burning, a beacon for every soul still searching for a road back home. In the end, the rusted halo was never just a story about a garage, a dog, or two souls rebuilding their lives. It was a quiet reminder that miracles don't always arrive in lightning or gold. They often come in small mercies, in second chances, in the hands that refuse to give up even when everything seems broken. Perhaps God works not through thunder, but through the steady hum of those who keep going, fixing what they can and forgiving what they can't. And maybe that is the true miracle, to find grace in the rust and faith in the ashes. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment, subscribe, and let us keep spreading stories of hope, redemption, and love. May God bless you and protect your home, your family, and every quiet corner of your road ahead.